able to keep the weather in his favor, I think Yuya's going to struggle to keep up the damage alongside of it.
Okay, well, Yuya is not leading the weather, but Hans is. It is the Typhlosion that has been a breakout star of this international championship, next to its best buddy there, Torkoal, facing down the Blood Moon Ursaluna and Incineroar.
But not for long, as the eject pack item activates. And this is such a cool tech for Torkoal in particular, because after one of your stat drops, regardless if it's from an Intimidate or maybe from your own Overheat, you are able to switch out. So Torkoal is now safe, so that if Pelipper wants to switch in, Torkoal can also switch in. And you can also pivot to get Garchomp or maybe even another attacker in, unafraid of an Intimidate.
Yeah, Hans gets to preview what Pokemon Yuya led and select which Pokemon in the back he thinks is going to match up best against them. And that Garchomp, no surprise, another powerful offensive threat to whittle down these Pokemon.
And because it's both the Typhlosion and the Garchomp on the field now for Hans, if there is a weather pivot from Yuya, you're still going to do some nice damage to both of these Pokemon. Garchomp can't necessarily go for an Earthquake, as you will be attacking your own Typhlosion. That's not ideal. But going for a Stomping Tantrum or a Dragon Claw in this position from Garchomp will do good damage to that Blood Moon Ursaluna or that Incineroar. Do have to worry about this possibility of a Fake Out into that slot, but that Incineroar is too scared to stick around.
Yeah, the Incineroar doesn't want to take any attacks from Hans Pizarro's Pokemon, but more importantly, Yuya needs the rain out on the field to limit the damage of this Typhlosion. Hans is going for that Terastallization to get the additional damage on all of the Fire-type attacks that Hans's Typhlosion is carrying. Does have the option to go for spread attacks like the Eruption or the Heat Wave, but instead the Dragon Claw connects onto the Blood Moon Ursaluna, and Hans is going to go for the Overheat into the Blood Moon Ursaluna, but it does miss. Ursaluna is able to avoid it and fire back with an Earth Power, and that means Yuya Tada gets the first KO of the game in a one-hit KO.
Hans recognizing that the odds of Pelipper switching in were so high that you needed the additional damage from an Overheat plus the Dragon Claw to threaten a knockout into the Ursaluna. Unfortunately, Overheat not the most accurate move, and that miss absolutely critical. Getting in the King Gambit here is nice. At least you can start to threaten some damage with like Sucker Punches, and having that priority low kick as well is a great move to have against an Ursaluna that's already taken about 50% of its health and damage, as that should guarantee a knockout. But you're already on the back foot, where as Yuya Tada still has his main attacker and a hidden Pokemon in the back.
And crucially, Hans invested so much into that Typhlosion. Investing the Terastallization means that there is no more opportunity for Pokemon like this King Gambit to remove the ground type weakness or even go into a different typing like the water typing to resist damage from the Pelipper. Instead, Yuya is just able to set up the Tailwind here from that Pelipper as another Dragon Claw connects into the Blood Moon Ursaluna, and you can see, even with the Assault Vest, this Life Orb Ursaluna is dealing super effective damage, and that is a fair trade. You always take a trade of this Blood Moon Ursaluna knocked out one Pokemon and brought another one down to red health.
But the Pelipper now is also down a lot of health, and thanks to Sucker Punch on that King Gambit, I don't think it's going to be as comfortable attacking until we saw that Sinistcha take the field and offer up some hospitality and offer up some health. Now, the nice thing is Garchomp is still relatively healthy, and this Pelipper will not have a way to deal consistent damage to the Garchomp once the rain is no longer on the field. Weather Ball will change type depending on the weather, and Hans just has to switch in that Torkoal to make it a fire type attack, which won't do as much to the ground dragon type Pokemon.
Yeah, but the problem is that the ground dragon type Pokemon doesn't also have great ways of attacking the Pelipper either, especially with the Sinistcha out on the field, threatening Rage Powder to redirect any attack. Instead, Yuya is just going to preserve Pelipper, because this is one of those moments where you definitely need to make sure that you are keeping your weather in the back, and you're even willing to trade a Defiant boost onto King Gambit for it.
but a call by Yuya, switching in the Intimidate user, knowing there was so much pressure to get the Torkoal on the field that King Gambit did not stick around.
Yeah, King Gambit is retreating just when it got the attack boost, and instead, it's going to be the Torkoal on the field. Garchomp gets a little bit of damage down onto what is now an Incineroar, but we really wanted to knock out that Pelipper, and of course, again, Torkoal has set the sun, but Yuya always has the ability to turn it right back off, and this Sinistcha is still looking pretty okay right now.
I feel so bad for Hans because I think his best option here, unfortunately, is to try and land another overheat, but this time into the Sinistcha for the same exact reasoning we were talking about all the way back in turn 1, with the threat of the Pelipper constantly switching in, and with just how scary the Sinistcha is in its ability to just keep using Matcha Gotcha consistently and continuing to whittle down, and honestly threaten to burn that Garchomp as well, his final damage-dealing Pokemon. You want to get rid of it as quickly as possible, but not only does it run the risk of missing, you also, again, have to worry about the rain returning to the field.
So this is kind of an awkward position now for Yuya, investing the Terrestrialization himself into this Sinistcha. That will be the fire typing, so any type of overheat or burning jealousy from the Torkoal are not going to be super effective, but you did just add a weakness now to the Garchomp's ground type attacks. And with that Protect, Garchomp has protected itself from the knockoff, which means it will keep its life orb and, more importantly, keep its hit points, as the Matcha Gotcha is just going to do not very effective damage to this Torkoal.
There are still a little bit of Tailwind turns remaining, and there is still speed control on the board as well from that Sinistcha itself, and just look at how little damage that overheat did to that Incineroar, probably hoping to catch that Pelipper in on the switch. Now that Tailwind still hasn't expired, the Incineroar will still be faster than that Garchomp, and I love the play of using Knockoff there to remove the Life Orb, because now that you have two Pokemon that are going to be taking super effective damage from the Garchomp, and as well the Dragon Claw into that Pelipper, we saw just how much it did. You really want to mitigate as much damage as possible from the Garchomp.
Yeah, and that Garchomp is going to be so important given that you have two Fire-type Pokemon left, and of course that Pelipper is within Dragon Claw range. So Hans' Garchomp has the ability to potentially just pick up whichever KO it wants if it can ever get out of the Tailwind.
It's a tough question because on the one hand, you really do want to get any KO at this point. So we'll just have to see where this game is going, as I think King Gambit is unfortunately coming in to be the knockout for this turn.
Sometimes a king sacrifices itself for its constituents, and the King Gambit now being knocked out will allow the Garchomp to come back in outside of Tailwind. So Sinistcha with another Matcha Gotcha. You know, Yuya is doing just a little bit of damage each time, but because of the healing of the Matcha Gotcha, wouldn't be too worried about taking any damage from this Torkoal. And now, from two overheats, Torkoal is just kind of waiting around to see if it's going to get a chance to attack, or just going to do anything. It's just going to be helping hand and support for this Garchomp.
But that support is going to be incredibly valuable when it will be super effective damage to either of the Pokemon on the opposing side of the field. The question is, though, how is the targeting going to work? You don't have Protect in play, but you do have the threat of a Pelipper switching in, which is going to be a flying-type Pokemon, which wouldn't take damage. Now, you could use Earthquake to guarantee that you're going to hit something or two things, but that also guarantees you hit your own Torkoal in the process, which also doesn't feel great. And if you go for Protect this turn so you don't take damage, then I think you run the risk of just not knocking out the Sinistcha in one go. So very tough call to make here. Let's hope to see that Hans made the right targeting.
Well, it's also really threatening here, the Sinistcha being able to set up Trick Room if it wants to as an alternate way of getting around the Garchomp. Pelipper will switch in, but Sinistcha is just going to use the Rage Powder to protect the Pelipper on the switch in. So all attacks will target down into the Sinistcha, so that is a stomping tantrum, and that is an angry Garchomp picks up the KO onto Sinistcha because of that Terrestrialization. And now Pelipper is out on the field and does have the rain set up, but is kind of being threatened a little bit here by the Garchomp. Not by the Torkoal, but the real big story here is that Garchomp is really on a timer now because of those Life Orb recoils.
It is going to be on a timer, and more importantly as well, I think it's going to be a little bit slower moving forwards too, as Fake Out and Tailwind is a great play for Yuya here to not only regain the momentum, but to ensure that the water type Weather Ball will be able to connect with the Garchomp before it could potentially land a Helping Hand Dragon Claw into that Pelipper.
Absolutely. The Fake Out and Tailwind is so safe here from Yuya because the Torkoal has been stuck using Overheat over and over again. Hans is just fishing for a critical hit at this point to negate those stat drops. There's the Fake Out onto Garchomp. Of course, takes a little bit of damage from the Fake Out and also the recoil damage from the Rough Skin. But there's the Tailwind, and that's going to mean that this Pelipper and this Incineroar are going to be able to target down the Garchomp at their leisure after this.
That overheat miss early on in the game was huge. You almost wished you could have traded that for one of these overheats missing, as these are unfortunately inconsequential, whereas not being able to land the Terra boosted overheat into that Ursaluna gave Yuya Tada such a leg up in this top 8 set, and honestly allowed him to take this game number 1 very comfortably.
Absolutely. He was able to take that Pokemon advantage, taking the one-hit KO in return on the Typhlosion. That's big damage away from Hans. Didn't have any other options there to get that big damage because was never able to get the Torkoal in a good position, and the Garchomp was always slower than that Pelipper because of the Tailwind.
Exactly. So you have to talk about adjustments now, right? Because I think the big adjustment is, do you go for the overheat again, knowing that this is a best of 3 situation, and odds are you won't run into the bad luck a second time, knock on wood, trying not to caster curse here? Or do you try and mix up your play style to guarantee that Sun is on the field so you can go for a safer play, such as the full health Eruption? If you look at the speed interaction of how switching works in Pokemon, it's always going to be the fastest Pokemon switches first and then the slowest Pokemon switches in. And if you think back to the Eject Pack activation, Garchomp was the Pokemon that came in, and unfortunately Garchomp was the fastest Pokemon on the field, so there was no option to just immediately switch the Torkoal back in. So another way you could approach this would be send in a slower Pokemon, and then you do have the threat of sending the Torkoal in again.
All right, well, it's actually a big switch up here from Yuya, going to go ahead and lead the Sinistcha alongside the Ursaluna here. He was presenting some very tasty targets for some sun-boosted fire attacks.
I mean, everybody loves matcha, so I can't blame Hans if he is tempted to target down that Pokemon.
But it has to be a very specific temperature. If it gets too hot, it ruins the matcha.
For sure, but I don't think you need a specific temperature to try and target down that Life Orb Ursaluna once again, given just how critical it was landing that Earth Power for the one-hit knockout in game number 1.
All right, well, Yuya has options here to redirect any single target attacks, but because of the fear of these powerful fire type attacks, the Sinistcha will be retreating, trying to reduce some of the damage from a fire type onslaught from these double fire types by bringing in a Pelipper. That is going to be matched by a Terastallization here. Typhlosion once again is going for the Fire Terra. Let's try again this time to see if we can actually land one of these fire type attacks and deal the damage we're hoping for.
But there's even more investment this time with the Helping Hand on the Torkoal. This is huge! And it is going to be able to connect to its intended target this time around.
Oh, but it's not enough to pick up the KO, but that is significant damage that Hans missed out on in game 1, and specifically did not get knocked out by an Earth Power here. Instead, the Hyper Voice will deal damage and knock the Ursaluna itself out with that Life Orb recoil.
So a complete change up to what happened in game number 1, because now the Typhlosion can safely switch out and change its attacking move of choice if that is Hans's priority. I don't think you need to feel pressure to switch, as Typhlosion still should be one of the faster Pokemon on the field until Tailwind is set up, but given that Overheat is now at -2 special attack, and given what we saw in game number 1, I do think it's a bit of a risk to keep it around on the field.
Yeah, at this point, Typhlosion has done its job. It dealt the big damage to the Ursaluna. You would have maybe liked it to do a little bit more so you didn't have to take that Hyper Voice in return, but you're happy with that trade. Torkoal is going to switch out here to allow Hans to preserve that Pokemon and the threat of weather control for the future. That's going to be the King Gambit switching in. With that Assault Vest, is going to feel much better about taking any attacks from this Pelipper or the Sinistcha. Another Overheat, though, in the rain will break the Focus Sash on Pelipper and deal a decent amount of damage, all things considered. But there's the Tailwind coming out from Pelipper. So Yuya Tada has taken control of the speed once more, and here come the Matcha Gotchas. Connect to both Pokemon, really looking to see if that gets a burn on King Gambit, just like that.
That is a tough turn for that King Gambit, getting burned on the switch. And also for that Typhlosion, it's great that the Focus Sash was broken on the Pelipper, but it's still just in this very awkward position where now you can't really switch it out because it's going to be taking a lot of damage from that Pelipper, whatever's going to come into that spot. You could try and switch in the Torkoal there, so at least it's going to be a Fire-type Weather Ball, or maybe Hurricane can miss, but then you have to ask yourself, with the burn in play, what can King Gambit do to really threaten the Pokemon on Yuya's side of the field?
Yeah, and King Gambit sitting there burnt, being like, Typhlosion, please don't switch out for Torkoal. Please don't switch out for Torkoal. I don't want to take a Fire-type Weather Ball from this Pelipper. But that's just going to mean that Yuya Tada is going for the Stellar Terastallization on the Pelipper. The Pelipper, the Pelican smells an opportunity here. Going to go ahead and go on the offensive. The Sucker Punch not doing enough damage thanks to the burn. Here comes the Weather Ball. No switch out, so no fire typing, just a Stellar Terra boosted water type, which means that King Gambit still survives another turn. Here comes the Overheat from Typhlosion once again, targeting down the Pelipper, and with that is enough. A critical hit breaks through the stat drops and knocks out the Pelipper, and now there is no more control of the weather for Yuya. And now, even at that low health, this Typhlosion is looking a little bit better.
It is, and that was even a life dew. So Typhlosion able to hang on for another turn. A huge risk into a huge reward for that Pokemon.
And it's Incineroar as the final Pokemon, trying to give King Gambit a little bit more of its a little spring in its step after getting burned with that Defiant boost. But man, with that critical hit on the Overheat, knocking out the Pelipper and making Sinistcha waste that turn of Life Dew, Hans is getting that momentum right back and may be able to force a Game 3 here.
You just have to wait out Tailwind at this point in time and really hope that Garchomp does not get burned by a future Matcha Gotcha. Now, the best way you can ensure that would be to try and double target it down with your Fire-type Pokemon and with your King Gambit. One of them's probably going to flinch this turn, but if you get lucky with another crit, you could be looking at a 4 versus 1 situation.
That Defiant boost is dealing a good amount of damage to the Sinistcha. Actually gives it enough damage to activate the Citrus Berry here. Sinistcha restoring its health. The Sucker Punch connects as Incineroar goes for the Flare Blitz. That will finally clean up the Typhlosion here, as the King Gambit will be taking a Matcha Gotcha from that Sinistcha.
And while this is only going to do, it will do slightly more damage now that it will be a single target attack. I think more important here is going to be the potential recovery it's going to get from this Matcha Gotcha. It's not a lot, but when you're a Sinistcha and you have that natural bulk, you're absolutely right. Every little bit counts.
Oh, King Gambit is still taking that burn damage and having an opportunity to consider what Pokemon to bring in here. You have the Garchomp and you have the Torkoal, and this is putting a really nice pinch on Yuya, because Garchomp being able to outspeed outside of Tailwind means that Yuya may want to go for a Trick Room mode, but with that Torkoal in the back and with Terastallization used on the Pelipper, Sinistcha is not going to be able to be safe from any Fire-type attacks from the Torkoal.
You still have to be very careful about how you approach this, though, because other than the Sinistcha, that still is a Incineroar on the opposing side of the field, and it is running Flare Blitz. If it were running Knockoff, it's possible that Torkoal could win the damage trade, or only Knockoff, excuse me, but it's going to be getting a Sun Boost for those fire type attacks.
You know, and also going to be knocking off the life orb on the guard jump, which is going to significantly reduce the amount of damage that Sinistcha is taking from that Dragon Claw. Means it has enough to set up another life dew here, healing right back up. So this King Gambit is going for the assurance. It's not boosted by the attack, not boosted by having taken damage in an attack, but the Defiant attack boost is enough to knock out the Sinistcha and leave Yuya Tada alone on the field. Just the Incineroar facing down. A guard jump and Tailwind is expiring.
And that assurance was enough to prevent a potential Trick Room from being set up as well. So now Hans Pizarro able